Good morning. We start our worship today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which our church is built, the Pawtucket tribe, their elders past and present. And I stand here before Rock Hill in Medford, where the log fort of Nano-Pashamet, the great sachem of the Pawtucket tribe, lived. So let us also recognize that the land upon which all of us who are watching our service today are on is land taken from these traditional custodians of our country, the indigenous people, their elders past and present. Good morning once again. I'm Reverend Hank Purse. My pronouns are he, him, and his. It is good to have you with us this morning. And now...
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Reading, Massachusetts. My name is Andy Gatchell, and I'm a member of the worship arts team. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Our mission statement declares that the U Church of Reading is a welcoming place to nurture and explore individual spirituality, build a committed and loving community, and heal the world. We are an intentionally inclusive congregation situated north of Boston, serving communities beyond our walls and inviting you to join us. No matter your age, gender identity, sexual orientation, differing abilities, religious background, spiritual beliefs, or political perspective, we welcome you. Whether you've been here from the beginning or just heard about us from a friend, we welcome you. Whether you're relaxing on the sofa in front of a big screen TV or walking the dog with your phone in your hand, we welcome you. If you're watching the initial 10 a.m. Sunday broadcast, please join us for coffee and conversation in the Zoom Fellowship Hall. You can find the Zoom link in the weekly church newsletter. We'll give you a few minutes after the service to brew a cup of coffee, because we want you to know something. You belong here. You belong here maybe just for the next hour, but we hope for longer. You belong here. You matter. We are happy to have you with us.
The way of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, we gather this day.
May the flame we now kindle be to us the symbol of the holiness we seek.
We are Unitarian Universalist with open mind, loving heart, and helping hand.
Our opening hymn this morning is There's a River Flowing in My Soul. It's written by Rose Saunders, who was a civil rights attorney and activist, active in the Selma, Alabama area during the civil rights period. She was also named the very first black woman judge in Alabama. And she writes this wonderful piece that's a wonderful affirmation of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Sing along with There's a River Flowing in My Soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my in my mind.
Good morning. This is Sally Lieberman, and my pronouns are she and her. Thank you to Ethan and family for lighting our chalice, and thank you to Ingrid for leading our children's affirmation. They are reminding us of what it means to be Unitarian Universalists. I'm joining you from quite close to the edge of the map on a barrier island 45 miles away from our church. We're looking at marshland and a tidal river that's protected from the ocean by a large bank of dunes. It looks wild and free. Right here on the edge of the map, in the northeast corner of Massachusetts, these marshes were once canoed and fished and hunted by the Pawtucket peoples, who were part of the larger Wabanaki Confederacy that included indigenous people in the land areas we now call northern New England and the Maritimes. Wabanaki is translated to mean dawn people. Here on the eastern seaboard at the edge of the map lived the first people in our country to see the sunrise each day. Here on the eastern seaboard at the edge of the map have lived for hundreds, if not thousands of years, people who saw the first sunrises. This weekend is a long weekend for many of us who will have no school or work on Monday, and we are called to honor Indigenous people. Indigenous is a word we want to learn to spell and to speak. Indigenous means occurring naturally someplace. Indigenous is a form of being and belonging where you are. Land gives birth and growth naturally to plants. Across time, the earth has naturally offered people safe and supported places to be born, to grow, to love, to live, and to die. Indigenous peoples are those who are where they began, where they were given life and natural opportunity from the earth. When you think about where you live, do you consider yourself of the land that is your yard, or your driveway, or your neighborhood? We who are not Indigenous tend to think of ourselves as owning our land, and our land belonging to us. It's a flipped way of thinking about where we are and where we belong. Our country was created about 250 years ago and is still relatively young. This land and the story of its people are much older than our country. The indigenous people who lived here did not take part in creating our United States, and although some of their ideas about living together were included in our founding rules and laws, their voices were not included. Often when we learn the story of how our United States began, we hear echoes of people who landed here or in places like this and thought that the sun was rising there for them. We must listen for other voices, forgotten voices, and always wonder about who is not included in what we hear and what we know. On this Indigenous Peoples Day, we might listen for stories of the land where we live and wonder about who was there before us. We can learn about the people who were born and grew and lived and loved and died right where we are today. If we are not Indigenous, we can learn about Indigenous people in our communities. They are here. They are with us. We can know more about people who saw the sunrise long before we came to be. Let's be curious, listen and learn, and now we go to prayer.
Let us open our hearts in prayer. Holy One, you surround us with a great cloud of witness, of elders and ancestors whose wisdom can inform us. if only we were to listen. Aid us in not understanding our beliefs as the only truth, but to accept that transformation and change are the most beautiful parts of life. Allow us not to see and to use our words and views as a means of gaining control of others. May we not become entangled in our beliefs and opinions so that we put down those of others. May we not be drawn into cravings of attachments and greed, but learn to let go and to rise above our own personal desires and wants. Help us to hear the voices of those who have been forgotten, those who have been overlooked, those whose lives have been seen as being less than. This morning, we hold up the Reverend Amelia Attridge of the First Congregational Church, who is grieving after the death of her father, Bruce, this week. May all who knew and loved her father be surrounded by love at this moment. Thou make us wise, so that we may know what is taught in every leaf and rock. Make us strong, so that we may be able to fight our greatest enemy, ourselves. May we be ever ready, so that when life fades like a sunset, we may come to you without shame. Blessed be, and amen.
This morning's reading is an excerpt from Braiding Sweetgrass, an exploration of indigenous plant knowledge by Robin Wall Kimmerer, a professor at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry and a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. At my university, as at many others, graduate students must present their thesis ideas to a faculty committee. When she was through speaking, there was an uneasy silence in the conference room. One professor shuffled through the proposal pages and pushed them aside dismissively. "I don't see anything new here for science," he said. "There's not even a theoretical framework." Our research was most definitely grounded in theory, in the traditional ecological knowledge of indigenous peoples. If we use a plant respectfully, it will flourish. If we ignore it, it will go away. This is a theory generated from millennia of observations of plant response to harvest. Subjected to peer review by generations of practitioners, from basket makers to herbalists. Despite the weight of this truth, the committee could only struggle not to roll their eyes. Anyone knows that harvesting a plant will damage the population. You're wasting your time. And I'm afraid I don't find this whole traditional knowledge thing very convincing. Her statistical analyses were all sound and thorough, but she hardly needed graphs to tell the story. From across the field, you could see the difference. Some plots gleamed shiny golden green, and some were dull and brown. The committee's criticism hovered in her mind. Anyone knows that harvesting a plant will damage the population. The surprise was that the failing plants were not the harvested ones, as predicted, but the unharvested controls. The sweetgrass that had not been picked or disturbed in any way was choked with dead stems, while the harvested plants were thriving. Even though half of all stems have been harvested each year, they quickly grew back, completely replacing everything that had been gathered, in fact, producing more shoots than were present before the harvest. Picking sweetgrass seemed to actually stimulate growth. In the year's first harvest, the plants that grew the very best were the ones that had been yanked up by the handful. But whether it was pinched singly or pulled in a clump, the end result was nearly the same. It didn't seem to matter how the grass was harvested, only that it was. Lowry's graduate committee had dismissed the possibility from the outset. They had been taught that harvesting causes decline, and yet the grasses themselves unequivocally argued the opposite point. After the grilling Lowry received over a research proposal, you might imagine she was dreading the thesis defense. But she had one thing skeptical scientists value most: data. The doubting dean was silent. The basket makers smiled.
Hello, I'm Katie McQuaige-Lucas, ministerial intern here. My pronouns are she and hers. We have acknowledged the land we stand on here today, and I will briefly add that I am from Karankawa land. That's not the only place I am from, of course. I am shaped by generations of origin stories, with a wide family tree that stretches all across Europe. Some of those stories have been told my entire life, and some of those stories have been told less often. There's one story that is new to me, that startled me, a recent discovery, when my mom called me to tell me she was putting together paperwork for the Mayflower Society. I think of myself as Texan and Cajun. It had never occurred to me before that a portion of my family's story is right here. As my mother sends me updates on her genealogical research, I've come to realize how many different ways of European settlers have contributed to my ancestry, from English and French in the 17th century to Germans and Italians in the beginning of the 20th. Nothing about me has physically changed, but I'm suddenly very aware of how many stories have come together here, in this moment, in me. Over generations, my ancestors switched from Italian and French to speaking English. They respelled their names. They became Americans, that is to say, white. So to what land do I belong? Many lands and none. I share with you the opening of Joy Harjo's poem, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. Recognize whose lands these are on which we stand. Ask the deer, the turtle, and the crane. Make sure the spirits of these lands are respected and treated with goodwill. The land is a being who remembers everything. You will have to answer to your children, and their children, and theirs. The red shimmer of remembering will compel you up the night to walk the perimeter of truth for understanding. As I brushed my hair over the hotel sink to get ready, I heard, by listening, we will understand who we are in this holy realm of words. Do not parade, pleased with yourself. You must speak in the language of justice. It is difficult to shut up and listen, and it's very weird to say this in a venue where it's literally my job to talk, to fill this space and time with my words. And everything I've said before now is tied up in me, in who I am, and in where I have come from. It's touched on stories of communities and family, but it's still all about me. What changes when I make space to encounter the voices and stories of other people? What happens when relationships can be built that incorporate all those voices of others? I return again to a selection, a little piece of Hardrow's poem. We say, put down your papers, your tools of coercion, your false promises, your posture of superiority, and sit with us before the fire. We will share food, songs, and stories. We will gather beneath starlight and dance and rise together at sunrise. The sun rose over the Potomac this morning, over the city surrounding the White House. It blazed scarlet, a fire-opening truth. White House, or Chogofeke, means the house of the peacekeeper, the keepers of justice. We have crossed this river to speak to the white leader for peace many times, since these settlers first arrived in our territory and made this their place of governance. These streets are our old trails, curved to fit around trees. I don't think I need to go into a whole lot of detail regarding the general story of colonial New England. Anybody who grew up here and went through the local schools likely knows far more than I do. And I'm sure I don't need to deconstruct those stories here. That work has been ongoing for decades, and most of us are long past the shock of realizing that our first grade teachers didn't tell us the whole truth. But it's still not always easy, for me at least, to see those old trails that underlie our streets. And being so new around here, around this congregation, I don't know you well enough to know all of your own stories and the narratives that have shaped you. So for this moment, I will simply narrow in on my own worldview to offer you a moment when my own worldview, my own story shifted. We know that our forebears believed that they were under a divine mandate to come here. They called themselves the New Israel, and they believed that this was their promised land. And so they did come here. And after at least the first difficult winter, they began to see God-given abundance in a wilderness teeming with life. And so the mental image I grew up with, at least, was that of people landing on an empty shore and seeing these wild, verdant forests. And it was easy enough to discredit that image, to understand that these shores weren't empty. It was easy to outgrow the simplistic story and to replace bits and pieces of it here and there with new facts. But I think it took physically being here, in this place, to fully reshape my own view. I needed to see the shorelines and the trees and the hills. By 1616, disease had wiped out 80% of the people who lived here. 80%. Whole villages were gone. Trade routes collapsed. The tribal configurations wildly fluctuated. The English settlers didn't step off their ships onto wilderness. They stepped into overgrown forest farms, lush gardens, abundant, yes, because they hadn't been harvested. All that my ancestors knew were tidy farms and town squares. They could probably have recognized an abandoned grain field next to a faded house. But could they have conceived of a forest being managed to be a garden or a farm? The patterns that we know leap out to our eyes, but it is harder to see the ones we don't know in advance. It's harder to find them. And my ancestors could have asked. There were surely some among them who listened to the people who were here and learned from them. But the majority of the people in positions of power and authority, the people who were writing the history, could only shape the stories with the perspectives they already knew. And they mostly did not see indigenous voices as legitimate. And even if they had heard and understood the fullness of the circumstances, realizing that they had not arrived in a wilderness, but in a land shaped by people, all that knowledge would still have filtered in through the worldview they already had. They already saw epidemics as God's hand making the way clear for them. They already saw God clearing the land of Canaan so that they could build their new Jerusalem. Any new information would have just been plugged into that worldview, stripped of the context of the original voice. There are some narratives that are so deeply rooted that they seem almost beyond question. Right outside my back door is a tiny square of dirt, and I've long wanted to turn it into a patio or maybe grow some tomatoes, but it's full of Japanese knotweed. And if you've ever experienced knotweed, you know how pernicious it is. The roots are a deep network of rhizomes. If you chop it up, if you chop it in half, all those fragments, they'll all regrow. If you try to rip it all up, any little bits and pieces you leave behind will simply turn into another miniature jungle. I've lived in this house for years, and no matter what I've done, the knotweed returns every spring. I've never been able to grow a tomato. The knotweed will always crowd out any new plantings. Keeping it in check requires constant vigilance. It's a never-ending game of whack-a-mole. So long as this country, my country, is content to simply chop down the visible manifestations of our settler colonialist stories, those roots will continue to send up new shoots, crowding out the possibilities of new growth. And like knotweed, there are some parts of our national story that need to be wholly dug out because they will not make space for other voices. So many of our institutions and structures are built on silencing the voices of others and concentrating power in the hands of a few. We may have rejected the overt Christian supremacy of a new Israel, but our society still privileges wealth, education, straightness, whiteness, and so many other patterns of domination. Our laws still treat the land as a thing that can be owned. The for-profit corporations that funded English settlement all along the Atlantic seaboard are still the foundation for our laws and our economy. And even when we attempt to combat these systems of domination, we so often buy into the underlying narrative. We broaden the definition of who matters. We try to add seats to the table in the halls of power. But it's rare that we ask why we have halls of power at all. Everything happening around us right now is a lot. Every way we turn, there is an urgent cause demanding our attention. The current political landscape, climate and environmental justice, the multitude of threats to the bodies and lives of Black people, the reckless behavior and negligence of leaders who do not care for the health and well-being of the people, or even of the people they're in immediate relationship with. On Wednesday night, Representative Mike Lee of Utah tweeted that America is not a democracy. He said that the goal of American life was liberty and peace, and that democracy can thwart that. This is obviously asinine. In a similar vein, Mitch McConnell recently complained that small dollar donations were becoming a problem. When I hear these things, I'm reminded of all those studies that show that when women's voices fill half the airtime, they're perceived as dominating the conversation so that men cannot speak. When voices are treated as if they are in opposition, when there can be winners and losers, when there's a scarcity mentality, our narratives become rigid and entrenched. Before I decided to go to theology school, I worked as a paralegal, and I spent part of my career working in family law and probate, helping people navigate divorces, child custody, and arguments about inheritance. And I know we've all heard the saying that there are three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. And that's usually what we see in court documents and court arguments. But something really interesting happens when people go to mediation to try to settle issues outside of the courtroom. And don't get me wrong, it's still fraught. These issues are still going to be extremely emotional for the people involved. But if everything goes the way it's supposed to, fingers crossed, everybody has a chance to be heard, to tell their stories. And they have a chance to build a new narrative together. As the mediator runs back and forth, there is the potential for something new to be shaped, in which everyone involved can be invested. And when everyone feels that they contributed to the final result, no one feels like they lost, even if perhaps they did not gain everything they wanted when they walked in the door. Broken relationships can be rebuilt, at least a little bit. And when we're in a space of mutual relationship, when we're able to share our stories with each other, those stories encounter each other and they grow and they change. Earlier we heard from Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, and this is how she concludes her chapter. We are all the product of our worldviews, even scientists who claim pure objectivity. Their predictions for sweetgrass were consistent with their Western science worldview, which sets human beings outside of nature and judges their interactions with other species as largely negative. They had been schooled that the best way to protect a dwindling species was to leave it alone and keep people away. But the grassy meadows tell us that for sweetgrass, human beings are part of the system, a vital part. Her students' findings may have been surprising to those academic ecologists, but they were consistent with the theory voiced by their ancestors. If we use a plant respectfully, it will stay with us and flourish. If we ignore it, it will go away. I'll repeat her last line. If we use a plant respectfully, it will stay with us and flourish. If we ignore it, it will go away. We Unitarian Universalists are a people of covenant. We're bound together by our promises to one another. We are also a people of democracy, and part of the worth of honoring the worth and dignity of every person means that we try to make sure all voices can contribute to our processes. But some voices are louder than others. Sometimes our covenants have not been fully upheld. We are an intellectual people and we love the written word. We are a rational people who love scientific data and well-organized arguments. I know that sometimes I need to be hit over the head with data to change my stories. I know that I often experience the world more with my mind than with my heart. And those scientists did mean well. They had rejected so much of a worldview that sees plants as objects to be used. Yet at their cores, they still saw themselves as separate from nature, from the world around them. And they still believed that they knew best. They did not fully understand and internalize that we are a part of the world, that we live in relationship with the land and with all other beings. And when we do understand that, sometimes there's this breaking open, a place where something new can arise. And I think right now we're living in a time of breaking open. We're starting to understand how so much of the way we've been living is simply unsustainable. And I find hope in that. If you'd asked me in 2000 if the United States would ever establish gay marriage as a legal institution, I would probably have said no. But over time, many people told their stories, and people realized that they knew plenty of queer folk, and that they loved them, and that they cared about them. And the larger story, the national story, began to change. It took time, and it took a lot of voices to make that happen. In 2014, at the National Book Awards, Ursula Le Guin said, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable." But then, so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art. Very often in our art, the art of words. The most important thing I'm carrying with me now that my own stories have been broken open and have begun to be reshaped, is the knowledge at how many of those other voices are still here, still speaking. When I spoke earlier about how many Indigenous people had been killed by disease in 1616, that's a story that often leads to the idea that they're gone now. Often when Americans attempt to reconcile our histories with our present, we sense that the work is ours alone, that somehow we just atone and move on. But the people who belong to this land, they are still here. And we have the opportunity to step back and to make space and to listen to their voices. We not only have the opportunity to listen to the Indigenous voices in our communities, but also to the Black voices, and to listen across boundaries of class and of education and so many others. And what is a church community if not a place for many voices, a place to reshape our stories? This, church communities, is where new dreams are shaped, where we can inspire one another and where we can reimagine what communities built in love and interdependence and democracy might look like. And so in closing, I return once more to Harjo. When we made it back home, back over those curved roads that wind through the city of peace, we stopped at the doorway of dusk as it opened to our homelands. We gave thanks for the story, for all parts of the story, because it was by the light of those challenges we knew ourselves. We asked for forgiveness. We laid down our burdens next to each other. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.
The gathering of our resources toward a common purpose is a sacred act. We come together as a community, joining our resources of time, tech skills, and treasure to sustain the church and each other. Since November 2019, UUCR has been giving away half the money received in the collection plate each Sunday to a nonprofit organization that shares our UU values. It is a simple yet powerful way for each of us to help heal the world. Our share of the plate recipient for October is Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is a decentralized political and social movement advocating for nonviolent civil disobedience to protest incidents of police brutality and racially motivated violence against Black people. Founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, it is now a member-led global network of more than 40 chapters whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in the violence inflicted on Black communities. Black Lives Matter works to affirm the lives of all Black people, including those who have been marginalized by earlier Black liberation movements, including LGBTQ people, the disabled, the undocumented, people with conviction records, women, and others. Members and friends make a yearly pledge. Most donate through a monthly check or automatic payment, but we hold a Sunday offering to visually demonstrate our generosity and support. If you're paying by check and would like it to just go to the church, please write pledge on the subject line. The easiest way to give is by going to our website, uureading.org. In the middle of the page, you'll see online offering and payment. You can donate by clicking the Clicking Here link. At the donations page, you can choose to which fund you'd like to donate. To share your gift with the church and Black Lives Matter, click on Weekly Offering, Share the Plate. To just give to the church, click on any other fund options. There will now be an offering to sustain and grow the life and mission of this church. If this is your first time here, please accept our gratitude. You've enriched our lives by choosing to share your time with us this morning and need not give further today. But please come by, visit our website, uureading.org, to see more of what we're all about. For the ongoing support of the sacred mission we share, our morning offering will now be gladly given and gratefully received.
I am Melissa Martin, your Member Services and Volunteer Coordinator. My pronouns are she and her. This morning, I would like to introduce you to some opportunities that are based in our church's mission statement. The first part of our mission statement is dedicated to UUCR being a welcoming place to nurture and explore your individual spirituality. We currently have several recurring offerings each week where you are invited to engage with staff and fellow congregants. These offerings include social hours and guided meditation. And this week, we also have our Liberal Ladies Gathering on Wednesday morning and a special family time superpower supper on Wednesday evening. Please reach out to me or Sally if you have any questions about either. The second part of our mission statement calls for us to build a committed and loving community. We have 2 upcoming ways to do just that. Both are on Saturday, October 24th. The first is by signing up to safely participate in our leaf raking of the church grounds that afternoon. And the second opportunity is to register for our premier offering of Beyond Ivy Cord that evening. Links for both of these opportunities can be found below this video. Finally, the last part of our mission statement invites us to help heal the world. This may sound ambitious, but there are ample small ways to contribute. This week, we invite you to participate in either of these offerings. The Side with Love UUSC webinar on Tuesday evening about holding officials accountable and enhancing self-determination of Black communities. Or learn more about and get involved with our UU the Vote and their upcoming week of action as we enter the final weeks before the election. All of the details for both of these offerings can be found in our newsletter. UUCR members are also reminded that our fall congregational member meeting is next Sunday, October 18th at 11:15. Please check your email for the warrant, related reports, and the Zoom link information. After this service today, you are warmly invited to join our regular social hour. Thank you for being a vital part of our congregational life.
For our closing hymn, Katie has chosen Break Not the Circle of Enabling Love. The lyrics were written back in the 70s by a Dutch Reformed church minister, and they are as relevant today as ever. They ask us to draw our circle wide and to love all our neighbors, the whole world over, as ourselves. Our own UUA president, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, preached on the very same theme when she was taking office back in 2017. And she's declaring that we consider no one outside our circle of love. This is a wonderful aspiration for us to have as we go forward in these challenging times. Break not the circle of enabling love, where people grow forgiven and forgiving. Break not the circle, make it wider still, till it includes, embraces all the living. Come wonder at this love that comes to life, where words of freedom are with humor spoken, and people keep no score of wrong and guilt, but will that human bonds remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, till people of whatever race or nation will truly be themselves, stand on their feet, see eye to eye with laughter and elation. May it be so.
And now, my friends, please join me in extinguishing our chalices. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts. We are called to widen our circles, to make space until we can encompass all people and voices in our beloved community. May you too be able to tell your stories. May you be able to find your voice, to speak your truth, and to hear the voices of so many others. And most of all, may you find joy and abundance in it. Go in peace.